Hello and welcome to our second webinar of our webinar series that is called SAP meets ENT EAP. The webinar series aims at connecting the Strategy as Practice community with the Entrepreneurship and Entrepreneurship as Practice community. And today, Boukje Cnossen and Julia Hautz are going to talk about co-creation and open strategy and entrepreneurship. And I'm really looking forward to your presentations. I'll briefly provide the audience with a short overview of what is going to happen in the next 75 minutes. That is how we approach it. So we'll first hear the two presentations. Each will present around 15 minutes. That is what we've scheduled. And the audience will get around 2 minutes or something in between to ask immediate questions if they come up during the presentation. And we will then have the opportunity to listen to a discussion among the two presenters for around 10 minutes. And then we open up the floor for a broader discussion. Now, I'm happy to welcome Julia and Boukje and tell you a little bit about their research and their person. Julia is a professor of strategic management at the University of Innsbruck. She's an active member of the SAP community, and in her research, she focuses on fundamental strategic questions that enable companies to transform and beat their competitors. And this includes creative and open strategizing. So she's one of the leading scholars in the open strategy research field, where she shows that, oh, I'm sorry, someone is joining, where she shows how open strategy is not only a concept that changes strategy research, but also how open strategy transforms the strategists' work and working practices and tasks and competencies. And secondly, Boukje Cnossen, she is a professor of entrepreneurship, organization and culture at the Leuphana University in Lüneburg. And she is an active member of the Entrepreneurship as Practice community, and she focuses on practices of organizing and entrepreneurship in the cultural and creative industries, with a particular focus on the role of space and materiality, and she will also tell a little bit about that. She has investigated co-working spaces, creative hubs, and artist collectives, and I'm happy to have you both here. And give the word to Julia, who will start with her presentation.
Yes, thank you, Milene. Thank you, Catherine, for organizing this and for the invitation to be part of this. In preparing for this session today, I was reflecting a little bit on the main theme or the joint theme that connects us, which is co-creation. And I also thought that we might have people in the audience as we bring together two different communities that might not be so familiar with open strategy and what it is about. So in the next 15 minutes, I'll try to respond to both of those characteristics, so to say. And I thought I'll start off a little bit with the term co-creation, and at least where my first touch point was with co-creation and where it's coming from. And then also go into open strategy and what co-creation means in terms of open strategy, in terms of reflecting a little bit on a current literature review that colleagues of mine and me have done recently on open strategy. So let's see how this works out. And if there are questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand anytime. So in terms of co-creation, at least where I was in touch with this concept is from the new product development field, where customer co-creation was introduced. I think it was around 2008 and 2009, where the focus was really here on a collaborative set of activities where customers were actively integrated in the innovation process, and here in the process of developing and selecting or evaluating new product ideas. And here the focus really was through this integration of customers in this new product development process. Several positive outcomes were created in terms of an improved product variety, for example, more creative products, but also a better understanding of customer needs as they are somehow involved in this process. And literature has here focused on very different practices that were used in this process in terms of crowdsourcing, ideation contests, community setups, and so on. And I also digged a little bit into this literature on customer co-creation in the context of new product development, because I thought it might be interesting to also see what is maybe an overlap or similar to the co-creation concept that we are using in the context of strategy. And here, literature really has focused on very different aspects, as you can see. That's just a small overview on what has been studied in terms of different activities and practices. So literature has tried to identify different degrees or scopes or types of co-creation, as you can see in this figure, which shows different types of selection and contribution activities. It has focused on the co-creating customers, specifically in terms of how they are selected, how motivated they are to contribute in this process. But of course, mostly the literature has focused on the benefits that can be created from this co-creation and from those collaborative activities between organizations and specifically customers. And it has to be mentioned that also costs have been identified, and also the need has been identified that considerable resources might need to be developed by organizations, and specific management capabilities, but also activities are necessary to make this customer co-creation happen. So all of these co-creation discussion has happened or has begun around 2009, where this customer co-creation more and more was considered. But if you look around, of course, this time was also characterized by many different concepts that essentially also focus on very similar aspects, which all have to do to integrate new actors in the innovation process through different mechanisms, either crowdsourcing, which is called also building on the concept of wisdom of the crowd. Of course, open innovation is also something that is very close to this, or is an umbrella term to those ideas. So this has mainly happened in terms of innovation processes or developing new products. And we now see, when we talk about open strategy, that those concepts of openness, of including new actors in a specific process beyond traditional actors, has been also something that has already been mentioned in the strategy process, but has not necessarily gained traction, although it was somehow considered by strategy scholars, and of course in different streams, for example, research on middle management involvement, it has been considered somehow. It, let's say, in terms of the concept of open strategy, it really started with the contribution of Richard and colleagues in 2011, where the notion of open strategy was first mentioned in a way that we would use it today. And then it has been followed by several research efforts and different research efforts and multiple studies since then. So in sum, and what I want to say in a nutshell here is that this openness that is somehow behind this co-creation is not something that is limited, obviously, to the strategy process or the innovation process. As we can see here, it is something that characterizes several domains in our society, has started earlier in several domains, such as open source software movement, open innovation, open learning. And they are all of those, let's say, openness movements are somehow characterized by these facts that on one hand, we have increased transparency, but we also have this increased inclusion of additional actors that we somehow involve through certain practices in some activities. So just very briefly, it has not been that easy from the very beginning. We have seen that those co-creation activities in the strategy process that I'll talk about in a minute have not necessarily all used the same label, as we have also seen it in the innovation domain. There was people talked about crowdsourcing strategy, co-creating strategy, democratizing strategy, and only I would say since 5 or 7 years, somehow there has been a consolidation, let's say around 5 years, a consolidation around this term open strategy, with the definition that most studies build on today, let's say practice-based studies build on today, where open strategy is defined as this bundle of practices that allow organizations to have internal or external actors and or internal and external actors in the strategy process through having higher strategic transparency and or inclusion. And important, it's of course that dependent on several contingency factors from inside and outside the organization. So if breaking down this definition based on different practices, open strategy is really based on those two dimensions, in transparency on the one hand, but inclusion. And inclusion is meant gathering of ideas and perspectives and suggestions of actors that are just outside of top management teams, actors that are not typically in the role of traditional strategy makers. So this is actually what reflects also co-creation, the collaborative activities and inclusion of actors in this strategy process. And as I've said, we have now focused on literature on open strategy that adopts this practice-based definition and have tried to give an overview on what happened, what are themes, what is important. And I just want to very, very briefly touch upon a few things, and we can dig a little bit deeper afterwards due to time issues. So first of all, literature, of course, focused on what are those different practices and how are they facilitated? What are the tools behind? And basically, it has been differentiated between workshops, different workshop formats, but of course also digital practices, very different digital practices that of course have different implications in terms of reach, scope, degree of inclusion. And this inclusion, which says, okay, working together with actors outside of the top management team through different practices, there are efforts to further refine it based on those different practices. As I've said, okay, there are some sub-dimensions. What is the number and range of actors? Are they from inside or outside the organization? How deeply are they involved? Are they just participating by offering ideas, or can they be more deeply involved through this inclusion? That means an interactive community of people that work together over a longer period of time in a sustainable way. Then, of course, the issue of how much are they involved, in which phases, only providing ideas or also in terms of decision making. Initially, co-creation in open strategy did not include decision-making rights. However, we have most recent conceptualizations that say decision-making might also be a dimension of where you can include people and the procedure itself. And of course, different benefits have been associated with it. I don't want to go into detail. and also different costs, which are based on those dilemmas of openness. If you create costs due to including more actors in the strategy process, not being able to meet their expectations, maybe not only selectively including them in specific tasks, but not in subsequent tasks and so on. When we looked at the methodological considerations of this strategy-based literature or practice-based literature on open strategy, of course, as it's practice-based, the majority is really on qualitative single case study approaches, which are using multi-source data and are triangulating this data. We have only very, very few studies, only one focusing on quantitative data, and cases are typically specifically selected because they are labeled as open and they are temporarily limited. Some themes that I want to open up for the subsequent discussion that might be interesting to see if we have overlaps in terms of practice-based themes is one theme that is relevant here is the theme of socio-materiality. So the role of materiality in strategy work, of course, is important in a practice-based view, where it's considering the role of tools and technologies. And of course, in the open strategy field, it is mainly the role of digital information technologies that have been considered. So those digital technologies are used or explored as material enablers of inclusion here and to overcome specific barriers. We have identified a list of studies that are focusing on the aspect of socio-materiality in terms of open strategy, mostly on how much what is the role of materiality in terms of how deeply actors are involved. I have here just taken some studies, very recent ones. If we take, for example, the conceptual study of Mount et al., they explore material characteristics of crowdsourcing that help to dematerialize barriers to inclusion in open strategy, or a very recent study in long-range planning that focus on digital visualization tools that help to help in the strategizing process through specific features and associated affordances to improve employees' understanding of strategy. Another theme is temporal dynamics. As the level of openness, it's not set. The organizations can move across different levels and degrees of including people. Again, a big list. Again, just some few examples. One example is of Kai and Canales, for example, that looked on the dynamics between the transparency and the inclusion dimension. So if transparency practices precede inclusion practices and how they influence each other in the context of a digital crowdsourcing platform, or also the dynamics of role transitions, which Violetta and colleagues explored, how middle managers transition over time in the process and struggle in terms of their specific roles. And the last theme I want to open up, and then I'll finish, is on unmanaged and controlled, because on one hand, many studies assume that openness and engaging in these co-creation activities is something that is purposefully driven by the organization and here by top management, and involves a lot of, let's say, investment, purposeful choices and investment activities and strategy design that is controlled from the top, from strategic leaders or CEOs. But more and more, we see studies that focus specifically on situations where we have not only managed open strategy practices, but unmanaged ones. Where, for example, we have a new study from Stjerne et al. They focus on how open strategy can infiltrate gradually over time the strategy process behind the back of top managers, unnoticed for some time, which is quite interesting. So it might be relevant for practice scholars, or where we might have overlaps and be before I go over time, I'll just open up potential ideas for future research where ways could be looking at the interplay of different practices that on the one hand allow this co-creation, which we term inclusion in the open strategy field, and different aspects, transparency, but also decision-making, how deeply or in which phases of the strategy process is this co-creation happening. And then we have the opportunity to focus even more on actors. Who are the different actors and how creation, not only of employees or middle managers, but maybe also of top management, who might get different roles here. And I've seen many single case study approaches, but I think my last slides or my last thoughts on the slides, so hopefully we can have this or discuss them in the discussion, and I'll make sure that the internet connection will work.
So thank you very much, Julia, and I'll pass the word to Boukje now.
Yeah, so lovely to be here, and also nice to see some familiar faces, some new faces. So looking forward to the discussion, and yeah, already very inspired by Julia's talk. So I hope that I can also engage with some of the things she mentioned. So what I'd like to talk about here is, first of all, say a few things about co-creation as it features typically in entrepreneurship research. I won't be able to survey all of the entrepreneurship literature, but I'll focus on a few starting points. And then I'll make a call with regard to what can we focus on when we study co-creation? What do we mean by that? And I'll turn to the literature specifically on entrepreneurship as practice, and what it has been studying in terms of co-creation and related phenomena. So finally, then I'll draw attention to the agency of materiality, and I think this might also relate to some of the remarks Julia made on socio-materiality, and I'll draw from my own research as well to give a few examples of what that might look like if we start to understand co-creation in terms of the agency of different things. And finally, then some ideas of how to move the field forward. Okay, so starting with co-creation in the entrepreneurship literature. So it's interesting to notice that when we talk about co-creation in the entrepreneurship literature, co-creation is mostly understood as co-creating knowledge. And co-creating knowledge then is typically the type of knowledge that emerges between us, so between researchers on the one hand, and then entrepreneurs or business owners on the other. So it's a very specific discussion of co-creation. Co-creation then means formulating a problem together with practitioners, so with entrepreneurs who face a problem. And then this research is also showing us that this co-creation of knowledge is a complex process which involves translation, shared problem defining, and overcoming barriers in sort of terminology that is used, the language that is used. So practitioners and researchers don't speak the same language. And that, for example, what we could do as researchers is use specific concepts to not to represent the world, but rather to help these practitioners, these entrepreneurs deal with the world they are in the process of creating or that they set out to create. However, it's interesting to notice that co-creation is indeed a notion that features in different fields of research, and one of which, one of the starting points of starting to talk about co-creation is actually design practice, so the field of design and the study of design practices. And I think this also goes back to some of those earlier consumer studies, so co-creation with consumers. And typically then in the field of design, Co-creation involves the interaction with the user or client, could also be the customer, but in design, it's typically conceived of as the user, at different points in the design process. So it's an ongoing process, co-creation. It's not just one moment. And it's also not restricted to finding knowledge per se. So it's a bit broader than that. It's about finding solutions together, or finding new ideas together. Let's see, yes. So indeed then, in this field of design practice and research, co-creation is defined as any act of collective creativity, meaning creativity that is shared by two or more people. So still a very human-centric approach, we could say. Collective creativity, so broader than just creating knowledge, but it's about creativity between people. So the idea then is that co-creation is happening through certain moments of opportunity. And I think it lends itself, this broader definition of co-creation lends itself through to a deeper inquiry into asking ourselves what else might be co-creating the process of entrepreneurship. So I'll say a few more things about that, because I think there is a very interesting overlap and similarity between how practice-based approaches or different practice theories that study entrepreneurship think of creation, not so much co-creation, but creation, and then these ideas on co-creation that we find in the research on design and creativity. Going to the literature then on entrepreneurship as practice specifically, I think there has been a long-standing tension in the study on entrepreneurship. Do we focus on the individual entrepreneur, or do we focus on the entire social environment through which something like entrepreneurship emerges, and then everything that participates in that? And entrepreneurship as practice, I think, as you all know, has been arguing for a focus away from the individual entrepreneur. So entrepreneurship is then understood as a process. There is this idea of entrepreneuring, and entrepreneurship is seen as a complex event and the outcome of many different influences. So clearly a focus away from the individual entrepreneur. There is also the idea that entrepreneurship is understood as organization creation. And indeed, there has been this, for a while now, there has been this idea of the relational turn in entrepreneurship studies. So trying to understand what different agencies and things participate, different actors, but also different things in general participate in the accomplishment of entrepreneurship. So taking seriously then this relational turn, rather than predefining human stakeholders as you would typically see in the literature on co-creation. So far studies on co-creation within the realm of entrepreneurship have said, okay, co-creation means getting all the different stakeholders, so the researcher, the practitioner, maybe the different stakeholders around the venture, together to define the problem and to engage in this process of finding new knowledge. Rather than doing that, we could also ask in a very open way what participates in the co-creation of entrepreneurial processes. And in order to do that, I think it's also important to understand what the entrepreneurship as practice research has done already. And indeed here, my sort of small literature review is not only focusing on studies that have very explicitly mentioned the term co-creation, but also looks a bit broader at studies that have focused attention on what different things participate in the creation of new ventures, to then go towards this broader understanding of co-creation. So different studies could be found here, and I think one of my the main points I want to make here is also to draw attention to the fact that there's not just one EAP approach, right? EAP is a broad field, and we have many different practice theories, one of which is, for example, structuration theory, found in the work of Anthony Giddens. Here is a study by Jack and Anderson, Sarah Jack and Alistair Anderson, that looks at rural entrepreneurs. And here we could see that, for example, their argument is that structures co-create their ventures. The work of Tad Schatzky has also been very influential. So we have also research here looking at interrelated practices and then different kinds of material elements within those interrelated practices. Bourdieu's field theory, the work of Pierre Bourdieu, is very influential as well. And here we have a study by Dodd and colleagues looking at microbreweries or the craft beer sector or field in Ireland. And here the idea is that a shared habitus of resource sharing and knowledge sharing co-creates the emergence of this field. Then we have also actor network theory, which might be sort of an odd one out in the sense that it's not typically classified amongst the practice theories. But Esther Baranaga's study on a social enterprise also shows the influence of different organizational practices and materiality as co-creating this social enterprise. And then finally, there's also research on sort of proposing a more anthropological view of entrepreneurship. So all of these studies, I think the main takeaway here is they have a different understanding of what practices are, different kind of ontology of practices as well, but draw attention to things outside of the individual entrepreneur to argue that these things help to make the venture emerge, or make the field in which the venture is embedded emerge. So my own suggestion then here to enrich this field and move these discussions further is to take inspiration from studies that have explicitly looked at creativity and creative processes from this relational understanding. So this is research actually positioned outside of entrepreneurship research, sometimes in discussion with it, sometimes really outside of it. And here's just a very small selection of what we could find there. So here there is the idea that ideas, so creative ideas, materialize themselves through materiality. So for example, this is a study looking at how people give shape to ideas in the context of a hackathon, how they express ideas by gesturing, pointing at things, using artifacts. So very micro level study of a creative process to show that ideas are not sort of immaterial, but rather materialize themselves. Then there is also very interesting research, some of which in dialogue with organizational research and other research really more from the field of SDS and sociology, that shows how creative labor, so specifically the work of artists, is facilitated by non-human collaborations and is looked at as a conjunction of spaces, affects, and materials. So for example, internet connections, buildings, spaces, the arrangement of things in studio spaces in the context of artists' buildings. And then creativity, again, is not something that is located only in the mind of the individual, and creation doesn't just emerge from the human mind, but is also helped through this assemblage of different things, so of spaces, of interactions with other people, afforded by technology, and so on. And then a recent study from the field of organization studies focused on how in a creative collaboration process, so a group of people working together on a creative product, so this is also located within the arts, visibility and focus has to be regulated in order for that joint creativity, that collective creativity to emerge. And finally, very interesting work in the field of the sociology of the arts that focuses on how individual artistic creativity is impacted by the social relations and the network in which these individual artists are located. Finally, then, just to draw your attention to two examples from my research that also try to understand the emergence of organizations in relation to creativity and the role of different agencies within that. So here's a study. Both studies actually are conducted with my great colleague Nicolas Ben-Cherki, who is at TELUC Montreal in Canada. Here's a study we conducted on 2 different spaces in Amsterdam, in which we looked at the role of space in how organizing emerged and endured. And there we engaged specifically with the notion of organizationality, which was originated in the work of Leonard Dobusch and Dennis Schöneborn. And we looked specifically at a design that was used in one of these buildings. This was a very impromptu design by one of the people working in this building, who created this as a kind of unofficial logo, this chicken, which then appeared throughout the building in many different places, and people started merchandise campaigns with it, creating t-shirts with the chicken. Some people even started to use it in their logo, so in the logo of their actual company that was located in this building. So we look at this artifact, actually, this design, and how it helped co-create an organization, a community. And the second example is a more recent example, which was just came out in organization studies, which we look at, in which we look at different performance art events and how they legitimize themselves as a case of performance art. So how these are pictures from the different performances, how by using very clear visual cues, such as the color white, same costumes, a specific way of arranging the space in a very improvised and quick way, you're able to recognize that there is an art event going on. So here we talk about the role of norms and conventions that show you that in these cases of art organizing, we're not talking about a political protest or perhaps a spiritual or religious ritual. We're clearly in the world of art. So we talk about engagement with the norms and conventions of the art world, focusing specifically on the role of materiality, how materiality helps legitimize these performances as art. So to conclude, how to move the field forward? What I find interesting is that this is coming from research on institutional entrepreneurship, but in that article, actorhood is conceived of as the result of ongoing assembling processes. So if that is the case, if entrepreneurship is the result of ongoing assembling processes, then the creation of ventures, but also entrepreneurial artifacts, products, ideas, actually never happened from a singular force, never happened just solely from the individual mind of the entrepreneur. And as a result of that, we have to conclude that all entrepreneurship or entrepreneuring is co-creation, which also could lead to, as a sort of thought-provoking idea, the idea not just to say organization creation, but organization co-creation. And I think analytically and empirically, of course, the interest is then to ask ourselves empirically, what does participate in that? So it's not just to throw this new word into the mix, but rather to open ourselves up to the idea that creation always happens from this multiple forces. And I think there really is an opportunity here to learn from sociological and ethnographic research on co-creation, specifically within artistic and creative settings. So I'll conclude with that. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Boukje. Julia, I asked you to join Boukje for a, let's say maybe 5 minutes discussion on, where do you see the overlaps? Where do you see tensions maybe? How is inclusion understood maybe in entrepreneurship? Is all strategizing also co-creation, as Boukje put it, with entrepreneurship and questions like that?
I have many points that I found very, very exciting and very interesting and inspiring in this presentation. So I have to decide where to start. But let's maybe take up this point that you just mentioned, Milena, because we exactly had this kind of discussion, as Boukje put it, that all entrepreneurship is co-creation. We had this quite often in strategy practice workshops, where we were discussing now what is openness in a strategy process and when is it open, or especially if we adopt a practice-based perspective where we focus on where strategy is created through the interaction of different actors. The question is, isn't then every strategy process somehow open and somehow co-created through different actors? And therefore, I think as the open strategy field is something that is quite, let's say, new in comparison to other research streams, we see this focus on this very explicitly and purposefully labeled and framed open initiatives where this inclusion and co-creation really, let's say, goes beyond the let's say a traditional or maybe a certain level of co-creation, or where this label is explicitly used to have higher levels of engagement that you would have traditionally. But we exactly had this discussion, and I think by bringing in this label of openness and looking at very specific or more pronounced levels, we of course have this difficulty of defining exactly when is it open, when is it increased co-creation. So it would be interesting to hear about your thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm. I think the easy answer would be that it's of course a matter of degree, but I also think with these questions of when is strategy open, or when is something co-creation and when not, I think it becomes really interesting in empirical research, right? So you can, it's one thing to argue about the definition, but I think a really interesting question to ask ourselves analytically is what makes a difference. Mm-hmm. So perhaps I wouldn't be able to speak about open strategy, but for the idea of organization creation, which mm-hmm. is sort of increasingly seen as an interesting direction for thinking about entrepreneurship, entrepreneuring. I think it's always useful to ask ourselves what makes a difference. So if it turns out that a certain artifact or a certain technology or a certain idea or a certain stakeholder or a specific discourse or a story makes a difference, then I think that has an agency. So I also have a very broad definition of agency in that sense. And I think it becomes interesting, on an analytical level, to understand how these processes unfold and what mm-hmm. ends up making a difference or what ends up being of consequence. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very good point, because by going beyond the strict definition or conceptualization, you are then empirically also able to study those cases that we just have mentioned before, those that just emerged that are not specifically labeled as something from the beginning, but that just happened because of specific actors that engage in certain ways or a specific process that unfolds without the need of specifically defining it in a way. So that's where it gets interesting typically. So I think that's a very good point.
I mean, I would also be very interested in asking you a similar question, in that, looking at open strategy, of course, you've been involved in that field so extensively. Would you also theorize then open strategy in a matter of degrees? So would you see different degrees of openness, so to say, or how do you conceptualize that?
Yes. I mean, that has been something that we just saw, and that's why when this started, of course, when you start with such a phenomenon, it is a lot about conceptualizing it, and we had a kind of let's say yes or no definitions of being either open or closed, which was exactly the question that we just defined. And then we realized, or the field realized through several studies, that there might be different degrees, but again, and that's why those subdimensions were presented, those degrees can manifest on different dimensions. So it can refer either the number of actors, the type of actors, are they within or outside of organizational boundaries. It can depend on the practice, it can depend on the specific task or phase in the strategy process. So what are really the things? Is it, we say, just idea generation in terms of people are just engaging in providing ideas, or are they really collaboratively engaging in this creative process and further developing them and reflecting on them in an interaction? Or is it just a one-way provision of knowledge? So that might be all different degrees. And what we have seen, and that's where the dynamics come in, that can change. Sometimes organizations in a specific phase might have this higher degree on one of those subdimensions, and then convert back over time. So it might really vary. And typically that's interesting, because a strategy process is a long-term process that very often covers several years or a longer period of time. So it's quite interesting to see those dynamics in terms of higher levels of openness or not, but still the field is, I have to say, is evolving on this. Additional subdimensions are suggested, are conceptualized. As I've said, the third subdimension of decision-making rights is somehow coming in. And that's what I thought is very interesting. What you mentioned, as in the entrepreneurship field, co-creation is also concerning the formulation of the problem. And I thought, so engaging together, not only in finding a solution and finding, let's say, the input, what can we do, but also working together collaboratively on the problem that should be answered. And that's something that we don't see so far in the open strategy field, and I not necessarily. So I thought that's very interesting, in also engaging together and engaging those co-creation activities in terms of framing the problem and describing the problem and even identifying the problem. So I thought that's a very interesting way to look at co-creation, which could also be transferred to the strategy field, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, I think that research also on co-creation between researchers and practitioners has really sort of highlighted the need for transcending those boundaries of knowledge, but also of language. So because people don't speak the same language in terms of the terminology they use and the work that's involved in that, I think. So has the strategy literature, even in the case of open strategy, would always assume a sort of existing common ground for having the same understanding already.
And I thought that was the other point that I was noting down, the formulation of the problem and then the language, because I think that is assumed in many cases, but that's absolutely not the case, because we have a wide variety of actors. Maybe it is not as much as a problem if we look at cases, and there is a high number of cases that has focused on involving employees. So within the organization, but from different hierarchical levels. and departments where you would assume that there is at least some kind of common language in terms of processes and practices and capabilities that are existent within the organization, some organizational language that they can agree on. But we have also examples where there are workshops where externals are involved in strategy workshops, suppliers, but also very external actors, people who have created startups or industry experts or IT experts. I don't know, they come together with people from the organization and work on these questions. And I think there it would be very interesting to look on language and terminology, because I'm definitely sure that there is very often not a common language, even if they use the same words and talk about problems and things. The understanding behind the meaning and how it's interpreted, it's very, very different. So just sharing here information and being transparent by no means mean that there is a shared understanding of what's going on or a shared meaning behind terminology. So that is something that I've also noted as a very interesting avenue for future research in open strategy literature, to focus on common language, on maybe tensions that emerge because there is no common language, tensions that haven't been recognized yet. There are studies that have looked at different expectations and different goals of different actors. So they might have different goals that they want to fulfill or reach through engaging in this open strategy efforts. But I think the language, that's of course would be a very interesting part here.
Hey, thank you very much for your discussion here and for letting us listen to these ideas. And I hope that it sparked some ideas in our heads, your heads as well. Thank you very much. I would close the session now. Thank you both for joining today, and thank you all of you to have participated here. I just want to advertise our next event. Let me see. It is on the June 29th. It's the third webinar of the webinar series. It's by Martha Feldman and Priya Khanna on effectuation, bricolage, and resourcing from a practice-based view. I would be super happy to welcome you there, and now wish you a nice day, evening, whatever, from whatever you join us. Yeah, thank you.